Did you stick with French in college? No.
No, we didn't have to take a language in
Mm.
college. I'm thinking of, brushing up now. Either that or that and maybe taking Italian. Because, I did a semester abroad in Italy, and although we would use like the language lab stuff, the only Italian I speak is like, from being there and saying I'm not going to starve.
Yes.
We're actually still 3 minutes before 7 o'clock. Hello.
What's the fancy pantsness going on the second floor?
I think Alianza is having some event. Oh, they have food.
Yeah, you can smell it.
So with one more person, we have quorum. Here.
Well, this very short licensing review agenda holds, probably won't, but there's only 12 items on it.
Oh, that is short for licensing. So we are live, but we are not yet. Calls to order, rule section 9659. And we don't have quorum.
And we,
Anyone joining virtually?
I don't know if anyone is joining virtually. I know that Vivian cannot make it, but I haven't received any communication from anyone else saying that either they can't make it at all or that they're going to participate virtually. And Vivian's absence is not an excused absence. She's just absent and, she wanted clarification. So I pulled out, the bylaws and sent her that section. She has a competing meeting, but it's not a meeting where she's representing the chair of the board. That would have been an excused absence.
I actually wanted to reach out to Catherine about that, is that sometimes when I was reading the bylaws and I talk about excused absences, one of them is obviously a caregiver, in whatever respect, but sometimes you don't know that that's going to happen until it's timely.
Yeah.
Like you don't know, if your sitter falls through, that has happened real time. So I'm sure that there is a mechanism for, permission after the fact, but I wanted to.
Yeah, well, actually, the way our bylaws is written, it's like if you're sick, obviously.
Right.
Hello.
Hello.
If you could sign in there, we're back to doing things on paper. Or if you're providing, emergency or care for a severely sick relative. I was speaking to someone in the borough president's office about something else, and they pointed out that all community boards treat excused absences a little differently. And in some community boards will allow for, childcare or other things that just come up.
Right.
Not consistently.
No, that's
but
what
they
our
will allow
bylaw says.
it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like not regular issues, but I'm more about that because it's written in the bylaws is the steps that you have to do is you have to submit documentation. I'm sort of before the issue and sometimes the timeliness is you
Well,
It doesn't-
Daryl is working on and the bylaws task force, so did you like email them a suggestion?
No, we're both on it. I'm gonna
Oh,
bring
okay.
it up. Yeah. Yeah. Just- No, so.
Yeah,
And
and if
I
they-
was looking at it, I was like,
And if they want to
This
look at
stuff doesn't
what other
that
community boards
particular-
have done,
right,
it might be useful. We actually now have
quorum.
quorum. So it is 7:01 and we can call the meeting to order. Hello, Jim.
Hello, my Tracy.
Hello.
Remind me,
Heidi.
Heidi, and everyone was an E.
No,
Wayne, no.
C,
no, OSI, no E in my.
But
But
it's
the
sound.
sound.
is
Oh,
E.
the sound.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, I too have no E in my name, but the sound.
Yes, and I have an E, but it's
No,
silent.
it's right.
No, but you have an E sound.
I do, no.
Well, we could call you Wayne.
You know, the only person who did that was my nephew when he was a kid, and Assemblyman Keep Right.
Okay.
My subway was delayed.
Right. So we are live. We have one attendee online. Let me see who that is. I do not know who is representing the 2121 to 2123 Amsterdam Avenue parking lot. There's supposed to be a zoning attorney, but I don't know if they're coming in person or if they're participating via Zoom. They do have a Zoom link, and they are the first person on the agenda. But that said, since I opened the meeting, obviously I'm Wayne Benjamin, Chair of Land Use for Manhattan Community Board 12, and starting at my right, the committee members are,
Hi, Tracy McNeil.
and my left,
Elsie Kaminer,
Anthony Viola.
Heidi Guzman.
Jim Berlin, although my family calls me Jimmy.
Jimmy.
So we all have E.
Okay, thank you so much. So while we are, waiting to see if the representative of the parking lot will show up either in person or via Zoom. And just to give some background, the office received an email that was forwarded to me, and apparently the building department has advised the client that they issued a certificate of occupancy in error, years ago. And it typically takes the building department, a very long period of time to get a C of O. In any case, so to say they did an error, I don't know. He wanted to bring it to our attention. It may have been Jim, and maybe even OC. We, in the years past, have dealt with a number of parking lots that, because they're completely or partially in R72 zoning districts, they need a BSA permit. So he may have reached out to us because we passed a resolution concerning it some time ago. But if they show up, they can give us more information on it. But that's the background on that agenda item. It's, they are trying to work with the building department, which issued a C of O, and now said, oh, we did that, in error. That gives us, the opportunity to shift to item 3, which is finalization of our capital and expense budget priority, something that we started talking about at September's meeting. And I see Ari. And we have to finish it at this meeting because October 19th is the public hearing that we will hold to discuss those expense and capital budget priorities. And so I think by the 16th of this month, we need to have our priorities into the board. And before I go on, I am triple booked on the 19th. So can I get someone to volunteer to represent land use on the 19th?
And
He
What is the
volunteered.
19th? I'm sorry. Is that the general?
No, that's the public hearing.
Oh,
That's the capital
The
and expense
budget hearing thing?
budget hearing.
oh, I see.
Basically, it's just to whatever we adopt
Yeah.
at this, to present it on behalf of the committee.
Got it. And where am I presenting them?
It's probably going to be in here.
Oh, okay, sure.
Right.
So
But
what,
you haven't been at one of these yet.
I haven't, but I'll figure it out.
Oh, no, that's the easy part, is the voting itself.
well, yeah, I mean,
Got it.
the presenting is the easy part. And when it comes to voting, there's always some commotion. There's always some mishigas. The forms
That's
will,
an understatement.
we'll get the forms in advance and then they'll be changed 3 times during the meeting and then sent out again. I looked at the statement of district needs and went through what we did last year. And I didn't really pay as close attention to it, but the land use items, both the expense and budget, were ranked #1 by the board. The #1 expense item was the land use item, and the #1 capital was land use.
Shocking.
But here's the thing, for capital, and that was the item that is somewhat included in Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites, you know, where we're saying to allocate capital funds to support planning development of initiative for, you know, vacant lots and buildings to develop affordable housing. So Mark is someone, you know, incorporated that in his plan. If you look at the executive budget response, you know, OMB supports the agency's position as follows. More information is needed from the community board before making a funding decision. The community board should contact the agency being HPD. I am unclear if, you know, CB12, be it, you know, the executive, the district manager, or, you know, the board chair, followed up with HPD on that. I think it's great that, you know, Mark Levine has incorporated that idea. I think we want to keep this as a budget priority, but maybe we want to rephrase it and say something more akin to allocate capital funds and tax credits to support the development of affordable housing for sites in Washington Heights, Inwood, you know, for the, you know, the sites included in the borough president's or in Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites, as well as additional sites identified by the community board and, you know, members of the community, because now it makes it more specific. You know, we're referring to that report, and we're saying, you know, there's a plan in place and you need to provide funding to help advance and implement that. But, you know, staying with capital for a minute, you know, what are your thoughts? And the other thing, and if Steve was here, he would be saying it, we also need to do something about making a point to the office and also to Catherine. Follow-up is important. Because if they're basically saying, yeah, we think it's a good idea, follow up with HPD, and no one follows up with HPD a year later, that's on us.
Right. The follow-up is crucial.
Yes. So your thoughts about keeping that capital and modifying it along the lines of what I suggested, sort of tying it in more specifically to the Housing Manhattanites plan?
I think I'm all for it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Agreed.
Yes. My only thing, it just feels a little wordy, but I think it needs to be a little wordy.
Yeah, we can try to wordsmith it, but
Right. No,
I've
but I
been
understand. because
accused
this is
of writing
just-
densely, but you know,
You don't want the agency to come back to you with more questions. You
Exactly.
want them to.
No,
just,
no.
we got it.
No.
They can't play like they didn't get what's in that
Mhm.
paragraph. That's the reason why it's a little wordy maybe.
So I don't know how we've done this historically, but would our goal be to try and advocate for it to be ranked 1 again?
well, every committee advocates for their priorities to be ranked, but that's part of, when it comes to the voting, after every committee has presented, you know, their items, and you'll see that, you know, we'll end up with 50, 60 of them.
Mhm.
It's then up to each board member, based upon, you know, their conscience, to rank all of them. And then all of those rankings get put together, and the net result of that becomes the community board ranking. But obviously, you know, we would say that, you know, we think, you know, affordable housing, you know, is important, and just advocating for affordable housing isn't enough. What we were saying, you know, last year and the year before, you need to have a plan to identify these sites, and then we modified it because, you know, what differentiated this from, let's say, what Housing and Human Services, you need a plan, identify the sites, put them together in some kind of a development proposal, and then put the funds in place to make affordable housing a reality. And, once you do that, you can move forward with individual, projects, but you need a plan and the mechanism, the funding mechanism to make it affordable. And that's why I suggested adding, in addition to capital funds, tax credits, because typically, the low-income tax credits gives you further ability to hit lower income ranges.
Is the 421A still around?
Nope. There's discussion of coming back, with something new. And is that something, well, maybe that's something Housing and Human Services should address. But I mean, from the perspective of affordable housing, if you don't have to pay real estate taxes, that, being in a co-op, I mean, that impacts your operating budget. So if you do have to pay real estate taxes, that's just another expense that
My
gets
co-op paid.
right. But that's my point. If there's a tax abatement, which is a 421A or J51, that takes it away. And, it's not just a matter of having an affordable purchase price if it's a co-op or a condo, or an affordable, initial price, if it's a rental, but the month-to-month, year-to-year operations, it's the gas and electrical and taxes and water and sewer and insurance, which goes crazy every year. So the extent to which you would say, well, we've eliminated real estate taxes or for a period of time, that helps on the operating expense side.
I was gonna ask you about the J51. I thought it went away.
That's my point. See, if we're talking about affordable housing, then we also need to speak to the agencies and our elected official about some of the things that help to make affordable housing affordable in the past. And what are they doing? If there were problems with J51, or actually, excuse me, with 421A, but I think on 2 occasions, Community Board 12 passed resolutions suggesting modifications to 421A that I don't know if the state ever took up. But having nothing isn't helpful.
So Wayne, we could definitely take it offline, but I'd want to meet with you before the 19th, just to get a sense of how to present this idea and
You
what to say.
convince them, they have to make it number one again, because it's good for everybody.
Yeah, but like, what's the expectation? Is it like a proper presentation? of
No, no,
delivery?
it's the, the land use committee has 200 or 200 items on the capital side. This is what we discussed. On the expense side, this is what we discussed, and why we think it's important. It's basically just reiterating
Okay.
to the people who were not there what we discussed, and what the because even if you distribute it in advance, you'd be surprised how many people by the time they get to the meeting still have not read the documents that were forwarded.
Simple enough, thank you.
Sure. But I mean, more than happy, we can, connect and discuss. So on the expense side, once again, it was ranked number 1. The executive budget response was OMB supports the agency's position as follows. Please contact Department of City Planning Borough Office to discuss this request. Once again, I have not discussed anything with the borough office. I don't know if at the district manager or elected officers level, there's been any discussion. I know we have our representatives from city planning, here online, but I don't know if we've had specific conversations about that. But once again, here we were asking to dedicate additional planning staff to work with Community Board 12 and local residents to formulate and implement a community-based neighborhood preservation and development plan for Washington Heights Inwood. Something that we talk about frequently. It's a matter of, having the appropriate, staff to work with us.
It's very
consistently.
important because they could follow up on questions that we have in case the office is overwhelmed, and which they are anyway.
Mhm.
So they can stay on top of it. My understanding that some community boards have more than 1 person doing that. Some of them have 3 people,
When you say, you mean on their staff or
No.
city planning?
the city planning. like in terms of hiring dedicated planning staff, and they have more than one. Some of them have three, but I think maybe the Department of City Planning can say something in that regard.
Can I ask a nascent question regarding this? And what specifically, I mean, here's the thing, is like, this is what we're putting in our budget. They're saying AO or an agreement, but talk to this department, but specifically what for?
Well, we're saying that, we want, or we need additional planning staff to work with us.
No, that part I got.
Right.
My question is what specifically are they saying that the borough office, like, I guess my question, like, they're giving us a directive. We reach out and let's say you call person X, or Catherine calls person X at the borough office, the president's office, to discuss. Does that meet their need, or are they saying that we need to discuss about something in particular?
No, I think, and, we can open up the floor to our two reps from city planning. I think what they are saying is we need to speak to the borough office and get a sense of, what is the current staffing availability? What are their plans, any for, hiring more, or for, allocating available staff to work with us to achieve what we have outlined. That's my understanding of what they're saying. But I see Jose and Audrey here. Anything you'd want to add to? I mean, because this can't be the only community board where OMB says, go speak to the borough office. So typically when they say that, what are they asking us to do? I think you're unmuted.
Yeah, I can respond to that. I mean, I think we will have to come back and assess priorities in terms of neighborhood studies that are being put together for the next fiscal year. We had this request in the past, and I believe, given that the Inglewood rezoning was so recent at the time, it was something that we kind of said, like, revisiting the area doesn't seem like a regional allocation of resources when we were moving around in Sohonoho and other neighborhoods that were undergoing the rezoning. We'll have to touch base with our leadership on that to see where we are in terms of like what plan we're moving forward, or dedication or dedicated staff for potentially developing a land use study in coordination with a community board. But pointing you out to Community Board 9, who partnered with the Board of President for their neighborhood study. Right after they did the land use study or so, the Board of President essentially had a sponsor. Board of President and City Council Land Use have sponsored the application to move forward to the ULURP process. So it's not that they have a dedicated staff from the Department of City Planning, but it's essentially a private application moving through the ULURP process. I mean, it's a public application, but it's not being citywide sponsored per se, or Department of City Planning sponsor.
Yes, and actually, you mentioned something which caused me to have two responses. One of which is, if you look at the language in our request, we specifically said that we're looking to do a plan that was exclusive of any work undertaken by EDC with that inward rezoning, because that plan, was not a, community-based, and it really had, land use met on that plan, I think, for 18 months, but it didn't originate at all with us, and it was very difficult to have the community board or community members input heard. So while I understand city planning might say, well, we just did the inward rezoning and we, thought it might be better to have resources spent elsewhere. Part of our problem was, after Community Board 9 adopted, and this is when Scott Stringer was borough president, so we're going back a few years after they adopted that rezoning based upon their 197A plan, we were told specifically that city planning understood that they, needed to give CB12 some attention. And we were asked to identify in what part of the district we'd like rezoning, studies to begin in, because it's a big district. We did that. We passed a resolution. Nothing came of that. And instead, some years later, this inward rezoning, even the inward rezoning, it started out, to my knowledge, as something where then, Councilman Udanis Rodriguez was interested in the area from 10th Avenue going east to the river. And it was focused on sort of an economic development initiative. And it kind of exploded into something that was much larger. I think the economic development was completely lost. There was a lot of concern about, contextual zoning, which is fine. But once again, that was not an initiative that, represents, the implementation of any broad-based community vision. The other thing, which is actually, I think, for the committee and the board, is we did talk about, probably sometime last year, asking the borough president's office to support our planning initiatives the same way that they have consistently supported CB9s. I think both Scott and now Mark have co-sponsored or taken on those zoning applications and helped move them through the process. So that's something, while it's not an expense budget priority, if we talked about that, then I think we need to follow up on that. Certainly, Jose, would appreciate your team's speaking with leadership internally and getting back to us and know what you can do. From the committee's perspective, in terms of this expense item from last year, it would seem that we want to keep it as a request, but we'd also want to make it our business to ensure that there's follow-up with the borough office as was recommended.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And specifically, I think would be helpful when we do follow up with the borough office is to find out what resources specifically have been given to other community boards. Because to talk about this in a vacuum, like this is our request, and you go, this is not our priority for this year, it does rings less, rings a little hollow when other people have multiple resources that reflect us. So the specific ask I would like to put out there, outside, not on the expense, but the specific ask of the borough office is when we follow up, is to have those stats about what other community boards have regarding this. But
Yes,
very
I
much-
just wanted to, sorry, not to cut anybody off. I just wanted to add, we had talked recently about this. I mean, when I say recently, what recently means, the city government, perhaps 3 months ago. So about like the West Harlem portion, what is called, of the Inglewood rezoning at the time when it was split between south of Digman Street. Digman, sorry.
That's Harlem, no.
Yeah, so south of that, there was another area that was, studied at the time or contemplated, but I believe didn't have the council member support. So, we having asked the city, city hall in terms of like where we were on this study. So we provided what we had in terms of the memos that we had, the multiple, resolutions that the community board has passed. And we have said, listen, like the plan since consistently since Inglewood was passed, it kind of had been targeted specific to the areas, right? Now, it started with the whole area to study this. Then ADC took that, and then the community board kind of said, okay, now let's study this portion. So we have submitted, I believe we were like 6 or 8 resolutions that we had sent together. We had sent our, a inventory of existing applications that are under, the radar for us, and also under on the ULAR or the public right now. We haven't heard back in terms of like the assessment. There are multiple neighborhoods that potentially will go a rezoning soon, right now, at the Manhattan office, we are all hands on deck on the office use conversion study and what is kicking off soon. So that, it will be kind of hard to say that DCP could commit to a study sponsor for us, or the support that we can provide to the community board on this. The board of president might have a different priorities, or I think the point that you guys raised in terms of distribution of resources to different community boards has been sometimes a conversation point for requests. I commend you for definitely bringing that conversation up to the table, because I will support whatever it is. I think I don't have a problem with like working in the community or developing a study or undertaking a study, but it comes down to priorities in the agency, and also that comes from City Hall, board president, and what are we going to be doing. To be clear, for the Morningside Heights, our office or the Province City Planning didn't have any involvement in the process. We are processing the application as we normally would. What we have done, and this is Audrey and our team in here, was ensuring that information that we were getting was accurate and consistent with our, specific standards and guidance on how we process any other application. And we have sent comments back, and we're waiting in the process, but we haven't, sat down with them to talk about goals or strategies or anything like that. That is all coming from their Morningside Heights Land Use Study Plan of 2021, I think. It might be that one. So that is being inferred from that, and we providing feedback, essentially what we're doing right now for the application, not the plan, for the actual application.
Right. That's understood. And I said some of this is on us. It's our responsibility. The same way that we can reach out to you or reach out to a developer, we could reach out to the borough office and say, for a committee meeting, we'd like to meet with staff. Or years ago, I had a meeting at city planning's office to meet with staff. So that's on us to say, we want to talk to you about X. And it's also on us to follow up with, Mark Levine and our city council reps, because once again, I think in the, West Harlem and Morningside Heights, if you look at those applications, there's a lot of support from the elected officials to help move it along. And the rezoning that I mentioned back in Scott Stringer's, era, the problem with 197A plans is they do not have the force of law. They're great for outlining a vision, but they're not rezoning actions. So Scott's office took the 197A plan and sort of worked with the community board to sort of pull the essential, planning goals out of that and move that forward as a rezoning. And then the zoning has the force of law because zoning is law. But you could spend years on a 197A plan and you could have everyone say it's the gold star standard. It has no force of law. So the extent to which we can get, our elected officials to help us into focus, and we don't need to do the entire community if there are critical areas. Just going back to the resolution that we shared, it identified an area that I think was from 180th Street to Dyckman. And the reason we identified that is we received maybe half a dozen either BSA ULUP applications for developments that were 2 and 3 times the as of right size. And it just seemed to be in that area where these applications were coming. There was one particular development, but in Gorman Park, straddling the subway tunnel that was 42 stories tall. So, we didn't say do Washington Heights from 155th to 220th. We said, we're getting these crazy applications in this geographic area, start there.
And I know which application you're talking about. It was by the park and the one that is under, there is a crossing under that park or an access point.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And I read the plan that you guys have put together. I'm familiar with it. I know I think one of the things that we did emphasize when we send this information was, that the commercial nodes that were, highlighted in the area. There's some industrial opportunities that were identified. So those are things that we, typically we will look into opportunity for a neighborhood rezoning or a neighborhood land use study. When you had the actual availability for making change. I just want to, another plug for this is, as you know, zoning for economic opportunity is getting referral hopefully at the end of the month. We are, fingers crossed on that. But there is also coming zoning for housing opportunity, which is the other text amendment. So a lot of these citywide text amendments are aimed to somehow, I don't want to say solving completely, but mitigating some of the issues that communities are facing right now, especially in areas where like businesses are not able to comply with like expansions or particular uses, and they have to go to a BCA permit. So those things are being kind of like talk about in workshop for zoning for economic opportunity, and also flexibility for additional either floor area if you're providing more affordable units. That is not MIH actually, it's affordable units generation, kind of similar to the inclusionary housing tool that we have at the moment, but getting that additional an extra plus for more affordability. So there are things that the department itself are doing, and then we hope that those things are in a way an effort to mitigate the issues that are happening in communities. I know it depends on what the goal of this rezoning will be, right? If some community boards are looking into downzoning or contextualized in districts, some other communities are looking for more development and more housing per se. So we'll see how it plays out. But I just, in case you get a negative response from the department, so I just wanted to say, like we are busy with that one, and then it might, their response will be like, we don't have the time or we don't have the resources to allocate this. We're rolling all these things out right now, and just prevent, and just as a heads up, that might be the answer that we get. But I think that for the president side, I can't speak on that, and neither can I the other city council members. And for Morningside Heights, the rezoning, the person who kind of like moved everything together was Mark Levine when he was a council member on that, and now he's board president. So like the local support is very important for applying like this. Yeah. With that,
I have a follow-up, but I think Jim Berlin had a question or a point as well.
Thank you. I just want to remind everyone about what used to happen in the good old days when, and maybe there's funding there, maybe there isn't, but previous borough presidents, and Wayne sort of alluded to this, actually had interns or staff people who were assigned to our board to help us with all this land use stuff. And, again, I don't know how the funding works or whatever, but that was very helpful to us to have, someone sort of assigned to us, and then they would become familiar with, stuff up here. Not that I'm saying you guys are not familiar with it. Right. But it was very nice.
Yeah, actually, we have the opportunity to get a fellow through the Fund for New York City, and Catherine asked Land Use and Housing and Human Services to identify a couple of potential projects. I think we both identified the, what we've been talking about with Mark Levine's housing plan to help identify and plan out some of those. But also what we've been talking about in land use, which is on the agenda, the Washington Heights Inwood Landmark Survey, as being, good potential projects that a fellow could take on. Haven't heard back yet, but there is that possibility. Just wanted to say two things. And you keep saying things, Jose, that bring back things from memory. What Councilman Rodriguez was talking about at that time was trying to bring tech industries to that area, sort of between 10th Avenue and the river. So it wasn't, economic development as in like retail or whatever. It's trying to like job generating and an industry that would be meaningful. And also, if you look at tech, tech could do a lot in terms of its reputation of representation of people of color and women, but, because it was that discussion of trying to bring a tech And he mentioned Google, but that got lost in the conversation completely. But for my committee members, I mean, item 4 on the agenda relates exactly to something that Jose mentioned. We have coming up, we already did City of Yes, I think for resiliency, whatever it's called, we passed a resolution. We have City of Yes for economic opportunity, which was supposed to be released, I think, earlier this month, and I asked city planning based upon that if they could present it at tonight's meeting, because once it's released, that 60-day clock starts ticking. I was advised that the release was delayed until I think the end of this month, so they will do that presentation at the November meeting. I did send to everyone a couple of links because there was an informational meeting on that. The presentation is there. I think the presentation and the Q&A runs about 2 hours, and it's hour and 57 minutes. So it gives you a good background. Following that, I believe sometime maybe spring of next year is City of Yes for housing opportunity. So we knew there were sort of a suite of 3 City of Yes zoning, initiatives that were coming through. And so if everyone would, take a look at between, now and the next land use meeting, the presentation that was given, I believe, on September 12th for the City of Yes for economic opportunity. That'll give you a good sense of what's in it and, maybe prepare us to have a more insightful conversation with our city planning reps when they present it to us formally. But also, I actually was able to attend the live informational session for the City of Yes for economic opportunity. And one of the things that, a few people pointed out, there seem to be overlaps or potential contradictions or conflicts between the two. So the extent to which, we can, pay attention to that and see if in Community District 12, how that works, where it works, do we have specific questions of what will be applicable? I think that will be useful.
And just to say, so for economic opportunity or any other citywide tax amendment that comes, I think it would be really helpful for us as we did with carbon neutrality. When you send us your questions, we're taking notes, as like we are not the people working. I think Audrey's actually working with a team with housing opportunity. So that's going to be a little bit a relief. She's going to be like one of the dedicated people working on the text. Right now, we are not the people who are working on text for economic opportunity. So when we take your questions, the sooner that we get them, we're able to circulate it internally and get the answers back to you. And I think, what we did last time, and even combining the questions between 9, 10, and 11, and 12 as a group of Upper Manhattan and distributing to all the community members was something that we found helpful. Some of the meetings kind of aligned in a way that was, productive for us to do that for your vote. And we hope to do something similar. This time is, in this case, 18 proposals that are being modified. Personally, I have worked in the small business services department before. So a lot of these things are very complicated. And I didn't want to, come to a meeting with like preliminary tests, as we could call it, because it's not being referred out. There's still some little items that are being fixed, amended, taken out, and didn't want to come to the community board with a presentation that I wasn't fully digested by out yet. So the info sessions are having great. I think they're going to be a lot of information, especially the Q&A. A lot of community members in other parts of New York City have similar questions that you will have in your community, for your community. So those are helpful. I'm going to rewatch those before I come back to your community, just to be sharp and be able to answer questions. But we will appreciate if you start collecting questions or for us, so we can have answers to at the meeting.
Okay.
Audrey, we can't hear you. You're muted, I think.
Actually, you're unmuted, but for some reason we can't hear you.
Nope.
No. why they call it the cloud. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not.
Okay, she's typing it.
Oh, you
Okay.
could, we could chat, she could chat with us in the chat if you want to, right?
Well, that's what she's doing.
Oh, okay.
Just in terms of the rules, I think it's for it to be officially a part of our public meeting, it has to be read out loud.
Right,
So
but
it's a
for-
part of the transcript.
Yeah, but
Right.
it's not there yet, so
No, I
Yeah.
wasn't saying that it was.
who can see this?
You should be able to see it.
No, the system is giving me the, who can see this.
Oh,
It hasn't come through yet.
ah,
Oh, she is muted now.
Well, she is now, but she wasn't before.
try unmuting your.
Okay.
Nope,
Nope.
nothing.
I don't know what's happening.
See,
Maybe we need a human sacrifice.
We're live. Just remember that.
That was humor.
Could you, in the meantime, type what you wanted
Well,
to tell?
I think that's what she's trying to do. But she
Okay.
says, in the meantime,
Okay,
let's move on. So, I mean, we've talked about the two items that we did last year. And I sent, once again, a couple emails. We've been talking about establishing a digital planning platform for Community Board 12 for some time. We had a really brief presentation by Sean Rickenbacker from the City College Bond Center, and they created one for CB9. And we were looking at having them do something similar for that. And since then, I think they've improved upon that, but they've created something called, I think it's an equity development or index, which will not just gather data, but it will also analyze it to look at potential impacts. And they have, what was this? What is it, or
That like program, what was it that person made it? For CB9?
well, for CB9, it basically was a digital planning platform that pulls together, information from various sites. So you can, depending on what you're interested on, the point is it was developed custom for CB9. So CB9 told them the kind of things they wanted to be able to look at from a planning perspective. So whether it was housing or parks or whatever, and you could pull up those sites and get data. And I think it also pulls in to one location information that's available from various city sites. So instead of having to go all over, it pulls it into a single platform, and then that community board can do whatever kind of analysis. And we wanted the ability to do something similar.
Interesting.
And in speaking with, the folks in business development, they also found it interesting because from a business development perspective, they wanted to be able to look at certain, issues as it pertains to business development. So we've had discussions back and forth with Sean about that. Since then, you may recall that we passed basically a resolution providing a letter of support. They applied to HUD for a grant to do some broader planning studies. They also, I guess, internally created, it's an EDI, and I don't remember the exact acronym, but I think it's an Equity Development Index. It measures the impact or potential impacts of some of these, development initiatives. So instead of just saying, here's the information and modeling it, it also analyzes it. It's almost like a mini impact statement. And Sean thinks that something like that might be of interest and perhaps more useful Because as he points out, if you look at the timeline it takes to realize a project, in many cases, by the time, it's done, it's, 5 years or more down the road, and so many things have changed. If you're looking at now, what are those potential impacts? You have a better sense of whether you want to support it or not, or how you want to, modify or tweak it so that the impacts are what you want as opposed to what you don't want. They've completed phase one of that, and I sent an email that outlined what they're doing. And so one of the things, and I don't know if it'll be an expense item or simply something where we advocate with our elected officials, they're working on phase two now. And I shared with you like the budget breakdown. We could say that we want, but it really wouldn't be city planning. We'd say we want the borough president's office or our, city council representatives to allocate funds to help support phase two of this, EDI project, with the specific intention of it being, of having Community District 12 be a subject area. But I don't know whether that would be something we specifically say is part of this, because this typically goes to the agencies as opposed to the elected officials to request funds. So, hey, Steve. Thoughts? I mean, would that be, for example, we could pass a separate resolution saying, outlining our interest in this, outlining what they've done, with, the EDI, pointing out the interest in continuing to work with CB12. Just for reference, it's the predecessor of the Bond Center, which was called the City College Architecture at the time, that actually worked with Community Board 12 back around 2003 to 2007 to put together the one and only complete land use and neighborhood planning study for the whole district. So we have a history of working with them. So, we could pass a separate resolution asking, the borough president and our two city council reps to help support that. I think that probably would be a better fit and more appropriate than putting in as an expense budget item, because typically that would go to an agency, and I don't think city planning would have the money to allocate in any event.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I do too, but, and I think, I'm saying the obvious, but we have to flesh it out. We have to actually explain to our colleagues on the board what EDI stands for, and, all the ramifications that will make, our board process, presumably, I don't know, more efficient, but the more data we can integrate, the better we will see what it is we're talking about.
Well, what about inviting Sean to do a presentation on the EDI in phase two?
And he can tell us what the letters mean too. Yeah. No, I know, absolutely. We've, as Wayne mentioned, we had a very excellent relationship with them many years ago when they produced this. It's essentially a map, and the map is in fact probably on the board website.
It is.
Yeah. So, it always helps to have professional eyes looking at this stuff.
Yeah.
Or more professional eyes.
Yeah, and it's more than, I mean, it's a several hundred page study that includes, many maps. But what's interesting is, one of the first things that came out of that planning study was the earned income tax credit, which was something not a lot of people were talking about at that time, was actually more beneficial economically to residents of Washington Heights than Section 8. And, that directly impacts like your pocketbook. And that recommendation came out of that planning study that this is something that we should be talking about more, the earned income tax credit. And, folks understand a lot of people based upon, the average income level qualified for it, but no one was really focusing on taking advantage of the earned income tax credit. And also in that planning studies where we first started talking about, contextual zoning and paying more attention to, preservation, we mapped the very few designated buildings at the time and, identified the same way that we're doing now with the survey, identified some potential buildings and areas, that could be. So there was a lot that's in there, but I mean, it looked at housing and parks and population trends and economic, so they did a great job for us.
I think this sounds wonderful. The only sort of strange question I have is that normally these sort of platforms set on some sort of host that has like a subscription that needs to be
The license.
paid for.
Yeah, and we talked about that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that in the
No,
email.
not here, but I mean, like every year when we're getting sort of to June and with your expense budget, if you don't spend it, you lose it by the end of June. I think the license might be like $3,000. And, there were instances where we're talking about having a surplus of, 10 or 15,000, and we're saying, we're just going to give that back. So there is, we probably do have the ability to absorb that. On the other hand, one of the things we can say to our elected official, borough president, this is something that we would like to do. It's beneficial. And when we did the planning study, the borough president's office allocated money to help pay for that. They can allocate money to help cover, the license.
Right, so where I was going with that, which is wonderful. I guess the thing where I was going with that is that there's one, this is initially supposed to be for the public, so I understand there's a last, sorry, you threw me off by interrupting me. I'm sorry, Wayne.
Sorry.
It's okay. I think the point that I was initially making is, I guess, as a part of the presentation, there's no, and you mentioned that there was a breakdown of the cost of all of this. I'm sorry, I couldn't find it in the emails. I think this is great. My only thing is that there's no talk about what it actually costs and who's supposed to pay it, whether it's us, whether it's like the bond center before said that CB9 was using their account when they were looking at modeling and things like that. So just some additional information about like the actual execution.
And that's why I said it probably makes sense, not probably, it makes sense for Sean to do a presentation, because it sounds like the way they set it up for CB9, may not be the way other community, because that was kind of a pilot,
Mhm.
and they were using their license, and I think even Esri, which is the firm that who's technology they're using, they have different levels.
Yeah, it looks like there's different levels of
based on
accessibility.
whether it's for-profit, nonprofit, and community boards. Probably, it sounds like maybe fall into a gray area because we're technically not nonprofit, but we're part of city government. We're really not. So there are a lot of questions. They're following up with some of that. So I think having a meeting with them where they explain, because I'm not intimate with their, with that program, they explain how it works. And actually, we didn't have enough time for him to demonstrate it because there were a number of things. So we probably want to have a meeting where, he can get a chunk of time to show us how it works. And also explain the cost, because the pricing that I saw there that I showed was not what it would cost us. It's what it costs for phase 2 of this EDI in terms of if we do a digital planning platform for CB12. I think that's where, what's the cost of the license? And at one point it might have been free or it might have been $3,000. But I just wanted to point out that in many instances when we're looking at the financial reports on a monthly basis, as we get towards the end of the year, there are, OTPS funds that far exceed $3,000. And in a couple of instances, we talked about allocating it, for that, but really didn't have enough time to pull together the information or an application to do that.
You mentioned that, this is, I'm totally seconding and thirding it. What we really need to see is a demonstration. And because then we will determine whether this is for us or whatever, or some aspect, and then if we decide this is something we really want or we really need, then we can figure out how to get the funding because, also in the past, we've gotten grants, for example, from
Mhm.
elected
Mhm.
officials.
And going back to Audrey's comment in chat, she's echoing Jose's comment. She said, send any questions her way before the presentation to her email address that we have, or, voicemail. Also, since there are 18 proposals, if the committee wants me or Jose to go over more in depth on proposals of interest, let her know. I'm training as a zoning for economic opportunity specialist, so I can help you answer questions, many of your questions. So basically what she's saying for the record is same as Jose. As I said, if we review those proposals in advance and have questions we want them to follow up on, that'll be helpful. So when they do, the presentation November on economic opportunity, they can focus on particular things that we have questions about. And the same thing, I guess, next spring or late winter, when we're talking about housing opportunities, if we have specific questions or areas of interest, if we let them know in advance of the presentation, they can make sure they target those, because otherwise they'll do the presentation, we ask the question, and say, okay, we have to get back to you, later. That kind of stretches the process out.
All that information that they get, it's like that from the city, right? Like all the information that they get to input all the numbers.
You're talking about the zoning resolutions or the platform?
The platform.
I think they're pulling it from the various city sites. So they'll probably be pulling from city planning and finance and, all of those, available. Probably something similar to what you could do with Zola.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Zola doesn't do, and I'm not playing with that, but it doesn't do the level of analysis of, looking at, what are the impacts. And I think the focus is particularly on when we had these discussions in the past about, equity issues. How does it impact, in terms of, race or gender or potential for, displacement. So it's more than just gathering the data. It's kind of trying to understand what a particular project or change may mean to a specific neighborhood or area based upon the specific, I guess, demographics and built form there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. It's like that kind of like program takes into account like cultural differences and all that stuff,
Yeah, I mean, I would think if you're looking at, for example, one of these citywide zoning resolutions, and you're looking at a community where the area median income is half of the citywide, and in another area where it's 150%, the impacts would be different, and we could just based upon the income.
If you want to see a version of it in action, if you Google like EDI, Equitable Development Next Door, the city of Portland has a version of it. It wouldn't be ours because we would ask for it to be specific, but it gives you like a sense of how this kind of metrics.
And that's the EDI, Equitable Development Index.
I wonder if like with like that kind of like information that you could say like, oh, like the people that have like maybe lower income or all that stuff, if there could be sections where they could do like free financial classes and all that stuff. So like maybe that kind of like area isn't so low,
Well, I mean, we can, once again, get a presentation and they can show us what it can do. But in terms of, free financial, we don't need to wait for a platform. I mean, there are, and when I used to do community and economic development, just about any bank, and there are some nonprofits that, do, financial counseling, home buyer, credit counseling. I think once or twice CB12 has hosted events like that. We certainly can do it more often. I don't know why we don't, do it more often.
Yeah, that could be super like beneficial to a lot of people in this community and all that stuff,
So is there anything more that we want to add or say regarding the capital and expense budget items? And Steve, for your reference, we discussed the two items that were in from last year, and we talked about, keeping both of them, tweaking the capital budget discussion to tie it into Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites. And in each case, I noted that the executive budget response basically put it in our lap to have follow-up conversations, and it's not clear to me if those follow-up conversations ever took place. So that's also something that we want to make a priority. If not the office, that we would, they're saying have a conversation with the city planning borough office. We can certainly invite representatives of the borough office to meet with us in committee. And, in terms of the borough president, I mean, we're sort of analyzing that plan as almost on a monthly basis. We can certainly schedule with the borough president's office to follow up more, because they're saying they support, the agency's position, but they need more information before they can make a funding decision. So, I guess we need to make sure that we do the follow-up, because we know that it may not happen otherwise. No?
Right.
You're definitely.
That's why we need a dedicated person.
Yeah, but I'm not saying that the committee can also
Right.
put it on the agenda that we, are going to have the conversation, and we'll feed that information, back to the folks who are doing it.
So are we making any adjustments to the language of the expense item?
I don't know. Are we making any adjustments, or is it basically?
You were gonna make the one adjustment for the first one.
Yes, but that was capital.
Capital,
Yeah.
but expense.
But in terms of the expense, we were asking for, to dedicate additional planning staff to work with us, on a plan that is exclusive of what was done by EDC with inward rezoning or any other city sponsor. We want something that, focuses on, and I don't think there's anything, there that changes, but
Well, does that language still stand, like EDC's inward?
well,
zoning?
they led the rezoning. That was their plan, not our plan.
Right, but it's completed now?
Yes, but
Also-
but the point is, even in this conversation, it was pointed out that one of the reasons why city planning,
Don't want to give us the money. is
no,
because
well,
they-
it's not the money, but why they focused elsewhere is because we just did this major, rezoning. The point is, it was not our rezoning.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
So you think it's worth still keeping that language in here as an example?
I would say
I
so,
agree.
Yes.
because if you
Yes.
look at like in CB9, that's their rezoning.
I see.
I mean, they own it. It came out of their plan.
I think it prevents for any shenanigans for saying we've already done this. And what we're saying is that you haven't.
Yeah,
actually
well, that's
done
exactly what, exactly.
Right.
And you see,
I agree.
you had your hand up
I'm sorry, maybe I missed the conversation. So you're doing the ranking now, for the budget?
for our committee, yes.
Okay. Then I'll ask a question later on about when the committee is going to discuss the main use plan to do a citywide zoning. Have you heard about that
In November,
November?
no, let me finish. In November, our representatives in the Department of City Planning is going to present the City of Yes for Economic Opportunity. And then sometime in the early spring, late winter of 2020, early 2024, is when the City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. So if you're interested in the economic development piece, that's the next committee meeting.
Okay, great.
It was supposed to be released earlier this month, but it got pushed back, I think, to the 28th or 29th or whatever of this month. So the presentation will be in the November meeting. And our reps from city planning said that if we have particular questions on, the proposals, and we send it in advance, they could make sure in their presentation they spend more time addressing it. So if you don't have, did you get a chance to attend the informational session?
No.
So I can send you the link. It was recorded. So they have the presentation, then they have extensive Q&A. And if from the perspective of licensing or from business development, if there are things questions you want, answered, or areas that you want more focus, send them and we'll make sure they get to city planning so that can be addressed.
So be communal, input.
Well, yeah, and for that matter, if representatives of the committee want to attend land use, so that, we've got a first section of, land use and business development and licensing, because at the end of the day, it's going to hit all of that. I mean, and the next one is going to be housing. So, while it's a zoning action, it's more than just the purview of land use.
Yeah,
Excuse me.
I would definitely invite business development to join us.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Audrey had something to say via text.
I have a stupid question.
Okay, one sec. So,
Can't hear you.
no, she's still
Is she chatting?
in chat. Mapping, this is not a city planning endorsed tool. I'm just speaking for myself. But I check out, www.qgis.org/en/site, SITE. It's a free mapping software to ArcMap and pretty easy to learn.
Thanks.
So once again, that's, this is the https://www.qgis.org/en/site/.
That's a lot of force.
That's a lot of forward slashes.
I like the free part.
Yes.
So it might sound stupid or I don't know. You tell me. With this expense, is it preserving the housing, or is it developing commercial areas, or is it developing
Is the expense or the capital?
the expense? I don't know.
Well, the expense isn't necessarily, focus on preserving anything in particular. It's working with us so we can develop a neighborhood preservation and development plan for the area that represents our interests and priorities. So it would encompass, whatever those priorities turn out, to be in terms of housing or business or open space or transportation. But that's the whole point of it. It should be a plan where it articulates what the community and the community board,
I understand, because I would have thought that it would have been beneficial, to have been put here. I don't know, let's say preservation of housing or commercial.
Yeah.
And insert it.
Can I address that? I think that I see what you're going there, but I almost wonder if we put that kind of language in, it narrows what we can do. But the language that's listed here just says, preservation and development plan allows for that.
and
It
everything else.
allows for
Yeah.
everything else.
Okay.
Because just like this other conversation, other committees will have a say in what should be included in that plan, because it's, it should reflect.
Okay,
All of that.
that makes sense. I guess just keep it more broad to be able to then narrow down to
Yeah.
those
But at that point, if you look at the plan that we did with City College years ago, I mean, it touches on transportation, it touches on housing, touches on parks. So
That's
it's,
the one that's on the
website.
On the website, it's
Yes.
like a land use study or something.
Yes.
Like that, right?
Yeah.
I
so
remember.
it's broad. Yeah,
I looked through all those pages.
right.
Very interesting stuff, though. Okay.
Okay. So, other than the tweaks to the existing, two, and, we discussed, the potential for, supporting the EDI, but we want to do that after we've had a more detailed presentation from, the bond center. Is there anything else we want to discuss in terms of capital expense budget priorities?
Like Ken just say, it just seems very compelling to have just one item, and that may be why last year we were successful with getting it to number one.
We like being number one.
Yeah. So let's-
On the other hand, being number one and not
No
following up
pressure.
isn't terribly
Yeah.
good, so we have to make sure we follow up.
Yeah.
You know, I would still like to argue for the city to take the Catsimatidis plot on 162nd to 163rd Street through some means, including maybe eminent domain, because it's such a tragedy to have that life sitting in the middle of our community for so many decades. I would still like to see that as a separate item.
And I guess the question is that, and it's similar to the question I asked about, the bond center. Is that something that is more appropriate to be in a document that's going to city agency, or is that more appropriate for us to pass a separate resolution to the appropriate, whether it's to the borough president, the mayor's office saying, this is what we want you to do with that specific site? Isn't that more direct?
Well, it's, I don't, it's an action that has to be initiated, I believe, either by city planning or some other city agency.
But city planning is not going to initiate an action on its own to use powers of eminent domain. That's going to be a political decision. So who do we want to lead that?
Well, maybe it's an HPD action that if they decide to use it for.
But
as a
once,
housing
but the agency isn't going to do that on their own. They're going to do it at the direction
No,
of someone.
No, they could do it at the direction of the mayor or their commissioner. But we've already tried passing a resolution and nothing happened with it. Actually, one of our former chairs, I believe, as a result of that resolution, ended up having a meeting by himself with Catsimatidis.
Yeah. That was, trying to work with the developer.
Yeah, well,
And my question is, if we're saying we want the city to use its powers of eminent domain,
well, I think this is,
do we want to put this
Well, I
in
think this is-
somewhat specific lap and say you're responsible?
yes, I would do it. This is a vehicle that we can use to once again try to bring that issue to the fore. And somebody would have to then look at it and respond to it, which they don't necessarily have to do with our resolution. In this case, they're actually bound to respond to it as part of the budget process.
So I saw Tracy and OC and Jim and Daniel. So
So just going that this is my personal issue and I fully support it. I actually going to say is I was wondering if this is something that should possibly go in future business where we sort of discuss what actually is the vehicle. One, us as a committee, we recognize that there's a problem, to brainstorm what we believe our collective solution is, and then to figure out what those steps are to then implement the solution. So although I like the idea of it going into the expense, I don't think that we as a collective have a unified, thought about how best to address this. And it goes to Wayne's issue about what's the correct, city agency or department or office we want to address, but we can't even figure out who we want to address it because collectively we haven't figured out what we believe should happen, other than we just dislike that plot.
Well, I think, if I can, I think it naturally lends itself to being developed as a housing site. And so, I think, but naturally, I think it should be referred to probably to HPD. Maybe that's something for the housing committee to be doing instead of us. I'm not sure. And actually, as I think about it, I might want to throw in the other site up in Inwood on the Broadway south of 204th Street. I mean, another site that's ripe for development that the property owner has been keeping just to collect garbage for decades.
yeah, just to follow, the order. I want to catch the other people, but I would point out, and I don't think I forwarded it, but the community board did pass a resolution in which we did include a summary sort of zoning analysis of what could be built as of right in terms of mixed use, and also, expressed our willingness to support sort of a slight upzoning to increase the density because it is a triangular site or whatever. So it's not as if we have not thought about what could be built there. And we did look at the zoning. And so we do know it's housing, but it's also, I think, based on the zoning, you could have first floor, right, retail and second floor commercial. We did that, but OC.
So, I fundamentally
Excuse me.
against anything that has like eminent domain in it. I think it's a wrong approach. We all know what happened with the water rights upstate. So for New York City, I mean water that comes to New York City. But it's a wrong approach. There should be other ways to get those lots developed. And actually, the one on 204 is in pretty pristine condition. There is no trash there. So regardless, I see the point. We want those lots to be developed, but not through eminent domain. This is not going to get you any positive interaction with the landowner.
Thank you. As I think something like this came up last month or the month before.
Last month.
Right, and my point was, we're putting the cart before the horse, except that we got some of the horse or the cart from Steve. We decide first what we want to put there, and then we can acquire the property by, well, in fact, as OC pointed out, we don't necessarily have to acquire the property. If we decide we would like housing there and we can entice a developer to do the housing, then they keep the property and we get the housing. But I think step one is to decide. Now, it may well be that both of these sites we think are eminently appropriate for housing and nothing else, in which case that's what we should decide. And then, as was pointed out, probably the housing committee might want to get involved as well. And then once we decide we want housing there, that's what we want, then it may not even be our job, it's someone else's job, maybe HPD or someone, to figure out how to get the housing there. And again, we don't necessarily have to buy the property. And again, just to reiterate that, although with eminent domain, you're forcing someone to yield their property, you're not taking it from them, even though that's the official word. You are paying for it at market rate. So, but again, they might want to keep it, it may, and again, why in both of these cases, the people who own that property see no reason. I mean, at the very least, they could put a parking lot there probably. Well,
Yep.
maybe not with the zoning as we saw, but it could be earning some money.
Parking is not our
instead of sitting
priority.
That fallow.
I don't know, I just hear that whole eminent domain thing, and it does sound kind of like, oh, we're gonna take everything that you have and just do whatever we want. I hear like the whole plan that you have, like to put in as an expense. I would first see it as just like do that study, and like see also if you can do like maybe developments on like commercials and stuff like let's say like a building like 5,000 Broadway. I think that building is, we need more buildings like that here, because like that was like kind of like an office space, and there's like a lot of people now working from home. Like I remember speaking to someone a while back ago, they were like saying like, oh, like we don't have like office spaces like how we work is like if that's like even still like a thing. But I know that
Shared, yeah.
like shared spaces, and I don't think we have much of those here. So instead of like even like maybe like let's say like, oh, like we're not doing housing, maybe we could do like a 3 or 4 story commercial building out over here, and we could like how 181 is where that Target is at. Like that'd be awesome that they had like a nicer building out over there where you could fit 4 commercial areas and all that stuff. So I don't know, that's what I'm just like adding on to, where it could be that the whole study could be what are the things aside from, like, what can we develop here? How can we get these developers or the people that own the lot to like fork it up without having to do eminent domain? Because you give the city land to do whatever the hell they want to.
Well, I just want to point out that, you know, city, state, federal government, I mean, eminent domain has been used, and, you know, there are pros and cons to it, as there are pros and cons to any number of things, but there are not a lot, public housing, schools, hospitals, performing arts center, all of those were, you know, built to develop using, you know, powers of eminent domain. Now, the reality is, you know, if you go back to, you know, 30s, 40s, 50s, throughout the 60s, the way the city and planning agencies, you know, thought about, you know, neighborhood, you know, not even neighborhood, community development, as I was mentioning with Vivian last, it was like you wipe it clean. And, you know, because if you think about the Lincoln Center, it eliminated from the face of the earth the neighborhood of San Juan Hill.
That was a whole neighborhood.
It is gone. So, but the point is, that's how the tool was used. But as Steve has pointed out, those of us who were on the community board maybe 10 years ago, that site further up, there was a proposal by, I think, the, you know, school construction authority to take the site, which means purchasing it, to build a new school. The property owner represented to the community board that they were going to build affordable housing there, and there was a plan and everything else, and that's why we should not support that. It was a lie. Nothing was done. In the case of the 163rd to the, you know, the former Rite Aid site, when Katsuma was running for mayor, and he was, you know, pointing out that he grew up in, I guess, in, you know, West Harlem, and he's ties to it. And we said, fine, let's kind of see his commitment to community. You know, this site is sitting there. It used to be a one-story taxpayer, for probably because the foundation was compromised or wasn't well maintained, and its proximity to vibrations from the subway. It was torn down. Work with the city, you know, work with the city and developers to build something there. And yes, the board chair did have a meeting with him. You know, nothing really happened. And once he didn't, you know, succeed, you know, in becoming mayor, there was no feedback. He is doing housing. He's doing luxury housing, like in Coney Island, which could be somewhere in Miami Beach. So, you know, how you use a tool isn't necessarily saying that the tool is in and of itself bad, because just regular real estate development can be done in very underhanded ways that can cheat people out of their property, or can, you know, cause racial issues where, you know, neighborhoods are, or communities are, you know, broken up and dispersed. But I mean, that's just buying property and redeveloping it. But the question is, how is it done and by whom? So the idea is, if you have property owners who are willing to work with you, and we always say, you know, let the city bring to the table the grants, the loans, whatever, the, you know, supportive rezoning. If you have folks who will for decades do nothing, or represent they're going to do something only to get you to oppose building a school, and then say, sorry, I didn't mean it, we want to think about, is that a tool at our disposal that at least should be considered? But I mean, we do need to, as Jim say, think about what it is, you know, we're doing. But, you know, years ago, there were some folks who said, never, ever, ever think about eminent domain. I'm not in that camp.
I just want to put out that we're focusing on the method rather than what we even want to do. I think we're arguing about step 2 when we haven't even figured out what we want our
But
step
as I
1
pointed out, for that Rite Aid site, we were very clear on what we wanted.
back then.
And I don't think it has changed. We still want housing,
I don't know. That was it.
Well,
Which is why I said I wanna.
I want my palazzo.
Right, and that's what I was saying.
yeah, you
is
want
that-
your, and so the point
Wait,
is,
there's not supposed to be crosstalk. I was still talking.
Sorry.
are we
It's
talking about
okay.
palazzos?
No.
Okay,
But I was saying is that, the point being is that this is specifically why I want to put this on the agenda as for possible new business, so we can talk about, and like you said, previously, the board has determined what it's wanted. I think we have a new committee. You said that was done like at least over 5 years ago. I think it's worthwhile to put it in for new business to determine what we as a committee want to do, and then we'll determine, once we determine what we want to do, what the appropriate is the next step. So that was my point. Whether it's eminent domain or not, or so forth and so on, that's step 2. Let's do step 1, which is what do we want? Because I don't know.
You don't want my palazzo.
So we're talking, sorry, so the original lot that we were discussing is the Rite Aid lot? Is
Yes.
that-
Mhm.
Okay.
right. And once again, we can certainly, and I think it probably helps to focus on specifics. So, Steve, if you would provide, I mean, obviously we have, but the information, on those lots, we can certainly do an agenda item to talk about it. But when we said that we know what we wanted, we pointed out what was allowed as of right under zoning. And, basically that's all, we said as of right under zoning, you could build residential and you can, based on the zoning, do, I think, retail and commercial. Obviously, could also be completely community facility, which I believe was the proposal that was being worked on with Columbia. But once again, does that really address the greater community need? We're not saying that Columbia shouldn't have, but the point is, for each of those sites, we can certainly say, based upon what the current zoning is, this is what you can do, and this is how big it can be.
Already, we're limiting it. Sounds like we need to discuss.
Well, I'm not saying we're limiting. I said that's, what we did. If there is an identified need or wish for it to be something else that isn't permitted under the existing zoning, then we can talk about, going back to our discussions of rezoning, what that should be and why. But I mean, in many instances, folks will say, well, this is difficult because, we are tied, and we're saying, just looking at what you are allowed to do as of right, this is what you can do. When we were talking about the Inwood rezoning, prior to that, there was the Sherman Creek rezoning. And it was pointed out that if you look at what they call the upland U along those avenues, the zoning did not prevent any of those lots or one-story buildings from being 6 or 8 story buildings. As of right, you can do that. The question is, why wasn't it done, which became a different discussion, but it was useful to point out legally, there was nothing preventing those sites from being what a number of people said they wanted. And sometimes there is this, misunderstanding that it's either the zoning that is preventing it or the zoning that's causing it. And there are a lot of other, financial and personal, decisions that drive whether something moves forward or not.
To reiterate what you're saying, which I pretty much agree with,
Hello.
it's simplest, of course, to look at what you can build there as of right, but as people have pointed out, if we need a whatever and it's not as of right, then we rezone it. And although we would like to have a grand scheme of rezoning, whatever, there's nothing inherently wrong with spot zoning for some special need.
And it wouldn't be called spot zoning because it'll be something more clever than that.
Oh. Innovative zone.
I'll see.
I don't think it would be a bad idea to maybe, pass resolutions for each and individual lot with our perception of what we want the landowner to do over there, just for us, just for, here is a resolution. If that ever come to, hey, this particular site will be developed, then we already passed something, so just something to do, and it may, I don't know if it will, if landowner will care about it at all, but it's just something we should do, just do, so we are paying attention to those lots.
Well, I think that's consistent with what Tracy is saying, and I don't think we're doing it necessarily for the landowners. I think we're doing it for the community board and for the elected officials who, have the ability to make some things, happen. So if we looked at the Katzman City site 6 or 10 years ago, and if we looked at the site that was supposed to be a school, but still is not a school, 10 or more years ago, we can, revisit those. We can reference those, and we could, look at in 2023 what makes sense. But in each of those, it's just important to point out that it's not that, we're pulling out of the sky notions about sites that we don't have any history with. And I think it's because of the history that in some cases we're focused. It's like, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice. It's like,
Can that be like an expense where we can like pay someone like to look at?
I don't think that's an expense item. I think that's on us initially to do the work to say that we understand what's and it's easy. I mean, looking at the zoning, that's part of what the committee does, but also articulating what we want to see there. Once we do that, we can give it to someone to further develop it, but I don't think we need to pay someone to tell us what we think.
Because I would just like see it as like have them like do a survey where could be like the holes patched up or anything like
Yeah,
that.
but see, the not to interrupt, but the problem with that is we can schedule, a discussion on this, next month or the month after that and have this internal discussion.
Mhm.
If we're putting in an expense item, first of all, we don't know where it's going to be ranked. Even if it's ranked high, it goes through this process where it gets submitted and then it's responded to. So sometime next year, they'll get back to us and say either we agree with you or we need more information. I think we have the ability to sit down and say, this is site A, this is site B. This is the history with the community board. This is what current zoning allows. And if there is, some particular need that would not be permitted based on the current zoning, these are the options for, doing modifications to allow that, or in some cases, you wouldn't necessarily do a rezoning, you might have to get a special permit, but we can have that conversation. And, once we are, articulate that, we could then say to the borough president or whomever, this is what we think, this is our analysis. And we could pay someone to take it further, but we have the ability to do that on our own.
I wonder if any of those resolutions are the stuff that Steve mentioned earlier. If any of those resolutions just mention any of those places that Steve mentioned earlier.
The 163rd Street resolution specifically mentions the site and, what can be developed as of right now. I don't think the zoning in that area has changed. What was supposed to be the school site, I don't remember how long ago that was, but we did not articulate what we'd want to see there. I think we might have passed a resolution where and I don't even remember, but at the end of the day,
We got snow by.
we got but the point is, we didn't pass a resolution indicating what we'd like to see there
No,
because we
no.
were told
Right.
they were going to pursue, an affordable housing project and what was described as something that the board supported.
Right.
But that was, that was all show and no reality. So if we would look at that site today,
Right.
once again, we would look at, what can you, how big is it? What can you do as of right? Because obviously as of right is less expensive than having to go through the process of changing the zoning or going through some special, permit process or BSA. And if we are saying in so many instances that we need affordable housing, we need different kinds of housing, it'll be kind of hard to say that on a site that's zoned for residential, we don't want housing. Unless for environmental reasons, it's not good, but we can certainly look at it. We might say that in terms of community facility, we want a PAL center, which we don't have, one of, but then again, someone has to run that. But even that would be as of right, because it's a community facility.
Where's the school site?
It's on the west side of Broadway, just south of 204. It's across from the Muskota School.
Academy. Close to Academy.
Right. So it's,
Next to it is that modular building, the stack.
yeah, so it's 8:36. So I think I would like to wrap the discussion on that, understanding that, we should schedule for our own internal discussion, something to explore this further. There is a question in Q&A that's asking, or they wonder whether the northwest corner of 181st and Broadway could be preserved for grassy space that would maintain open sky and air in a very crowded traffic area. Once again, is that the site of the former theater?
Yeah,
The northwest corner?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the old Coliseum.
Right.
site.
So, I mean, once again, that is a privately owned site.
Yeah.
And if, keeping it as a park,
Well, I wouldn't say you're keeping it as a park.
well, I mean,
We're making it into.
making it into a park.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, but that would mean either the private property owner would want to take that property, which is on a busy commercial intersection, and say, I want to keep it as private open space. Or the city of New York could say, we want to buy that space and turn it into a park. But once again, this is one of the things where, there are conflicting or competing interests, because would business development or the bid say what we need in that area is a small, commercial building, as opposed to on 181st and Broadway.
another movie theater.
Or, well, people wanted to keep the movie
Right.
theater, but you need to, so once again, someone could look at, that site and say, let's keep it as open space. There would be mechanisms to do that, and other folks could look at it and say that, it's on one of the major commercial strips in the community, and if we don't have, the kind of, office space, that other communities have. I recall years ago, some of our nonprofits pointed out that they are in substandard space that's been renovated from one thing to the other, but that's all that's available, in the community. Community League of the Heights has better space now because they built a new building.
I think I swear to you, I think this neighborhood would thrive a little bit more. There were like more places like that where it's just like commercials, people could run out places, people go like start little businesses in
Right,
places like
so
that.
that's my point in responding to the question. Can it be done, if a private property owner wants to do that, if the city of New York wants to purchase that? But even if it can be done, the question is, from the community's perspective and community board's perspective, there are a range of, competing interests, and someone might say that in that location, having, open space wouldn't be like the best thing. It might be, particularly given the busy commercial nature of the area, to take advantage of that with a building, that can, be retail or commercial, given the fact that we don't have as many such
I have something that
facilities.
might be off topic, but like, let's say someone does like develop something on like a private property owner's land, like, what incentives do they get? Like, let's say the city does something like that.
Well, the city
Do they-
can't, the
do they-
city can't just do something on private property owner's land. If the city buys the land, it's no longer private. If a private property owner partners with a city agency to get, grants or whatever, it's still privately owned, but they are tied to whatever conditions go with either, the capital grants or if it's a tax abatement, but it's still privately owned. But if I own a site, the city can't just come in and say, I'm building something there. They can, through powers of eminent domain, or they can come to me and say, we want to buy the site. But once they buy it, it's no longer privately owned.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like anywhere that there can be like some kind of like incentive program where like, hey, like, let's build a building over here. Like, come on, like, we need the land.
Yeah.
You know?
Anything's possible, but once again, people have to agree. With Heidi.
I think I support us having more discussions about this in terms of new business, because I think it sounds like there's a history with one of the specific sites in terms of rezos, but I do think it might be helpful in terms of establishing a history for the other sites. And I was thinking about this in terms of the expense item, because there's nothing saying that our interest in developing these particular sites shouldn't be something that is part of the work done by the staff that we're trying to allocate for the purposes of the development plan. And so possibly having a history of, here are some resolutions we passed about, say, the Rite Aid site, or, Broadway and 181st, we want you all to figure out what the community wants with these sites. I think that's, like, I would encourage us to not think about this as a separate conversation from the existing expense item. Yeah.
Technically, expense items are very low in price, so this would definitely, if we're talking about buying something, it would have to be a capital item.
Yeah, no, I think what I'm trying to get at is more in terms of the expense item of allocating the staff. There's nothing prohibiting that staff from looking
From looking at
into-
that as part of the planning
Right.
initiative.
Right.
Our staff? We
No,
don't-
No.
That-
So we've wrapped that discussion and we're confused. Wait, we have, I know Ari had his hand up for a second and then Elizabeth asked, how she can speak. So either of you who want to speak, just raise your hand and I can have you unmuted. Okay, there we are. So you should be able to speak now, Elizabeth. You have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I really appreciate the fact that you read my question. It is, I understand that one of the things that the board wants to consider is a survey of the area, right? You've been talking about that in different ways. And so while I completely understand the idea that 181st Street and Broadway is a very busy, very commercial kind of corner, I think that the discussions about the various stores, let's say, whether it was Rite Aid or any of the others, really don't, should certainly be included, but really don't hit to what is actually going on economically in terms of the neighborhood. We've sort of abandoned the notion that this was not a high-rise neighborhood. We let the Radio Hotel go in. There are several projects that are rising up over 6 floors because the law or the custom now is no longer to say, okay, six stories are the height of this neighborhood, which it is. It has been historically. So I just think that not to, and of course I was a childhood fan of the RKO and spent my life there. The movie theater on that corner. It isn't that I am so making a brief for that corner, except when goes by and sees the fact that there was a private investor, they somehow could not complete their task, and all we see are we see beautiful green weeds on that corner, and it makes a big difference. So I'm just asking for a little space in the contemplation as to whether or not there's such a need for all of the little, I mean, I miss all of the little stores. And now we are having a lot of chain stores come in that not necessarily the best for the neighborhood. So I'm hoping that this can go into the survey, the land and occupancy survey, and the contemplation of what could be possible beyond high rises. It isn't just that we don't have enough apartments in the neighborhood. We have, as you must know, too high rents, and so many people can't obtain apartments. There are apartments sitting empty that people can't obtain. Do we know in this committee how many apartments are empty?
The land use committee would not be the committee tracking the number of vacant apartments. That would be something that housing
Nobody.
and human services, but beyond that, I think the point that you made would be an interesting conversation to have with the business development committee, because that kind of goes to what we were talking about before. You know, there is what's permitted by zoning, and then there's what would you like to see. So if we're saying that having retail activity, but retail activity on the scale that supports small businesses, you know, and actually I think the business development committee has discussed things like that, you know.
Sure they have.
That's, you know, that's the kind of, dialogue that I think between the business development and licensing, but I would say more so business development would feed into what's the vision for, that area, what would be appropriate for that area.
Okay, and I know that I'm taking more time perhaps, but the fragmentation of discussion like this, where
But
you go
Elizabeth,
from one little hole to another little hole to another little hole.
just need to point out that the committees they have jurisdiction over a number of things. And we just brought up, or you brought up that corner from the perspective of, can we keep it as open space? And from the land use perspective, we explained what was doable. But what you're talking about is really not keeping it open space. What you're also talking about is, wouldn't it be, more in keeping with the neighborhood to have small businesses? We have a committee that deals with, the discussion of business development and what would be beneficial for the neighborhood at different scales. And I'm simply saying that would be a great conversation to have with them. One committee doesn't take care of everything.
Thank you.
I just wanted to point out that the Radio Hotel was built consistent with zoning. It turns out zoning allows you to build a hotel provided you're within a quarter of a mile of an interstate highway, and I-95 in the trench there is less than a quarter of a mile away. So
But
they were perfectly permitted to build their
yes,
hotel.
but
They did need a zoning variance.
But it had nothing to do with that.
they did not need any zoning variance for the
Hotel.
height of the
Right,
building.
Right.
It's a pretty big site. They needed some variances because of the way it kind of stacks. I mean, architecturally, I don't like the building. But once again, if you look at that site, we were talking about a site near there for a charter school. And even we were looking at a site, I think a block away from there, and everyone was talking about how busy it is, how busy it is, how busy it is. Having, hotel, restaurant, and some commercial, but that is pretty decent use given that intersection. And probably it's not a great use if you wanted to have an elementary school there, but, we digress.
Could I just add-
One second. One second. Ari, at one point you had your hand up. Did you want to say something as well? Then if you do, would you raise your hand again? Seeing none. Steve.
Yeah, so if we're going to have a follow-up discussion next month or whenever on the two sites that I've mentioned, I now want to add a third site to the mix, the one that Martin Collins previously brought to our attention at Nagel and Thayer, where there had been a fire and it's now a fairly large open site,
It was
which is,
vibrant, yeah.
which is also, ripe for development, and,
So
we should be looking into,
if we could
the
get,
possibilities
yeah,
of doing
if-
something there.
if we could get the actual street addresses, so I could pull up the block and lot numbers.
148-154.
Please.
On that map that I have.
No, stop, stop. If you could send
Okay,
the information, so I could pull up the block and lot, and we could pull from probably, city planning or someone's, site, the site and the zoning, so that we can share it, and have some reference material to talk about.
I would like us to vote on the two items, the expense and the.
Well, I mean,
capital.
I did ask, other than what we discussed, were there any other tweaks or changes? I didn't hear any. So, absent that, is there support for resubmitting or submitting our capital and expense priorities as modified?
I move to support that.
I second the motion.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Any?
Your hand is up. too,
That's
right?
8 out of 8.
Yes.
Oh, unanimous. Look at that.
And any opposed or abstaining? No. I still do not see anyone from 2121 Amsterdam Avenue. So I don't know what's happening with that.
in brief, what is the issue?
Something with a parking lot.
I know.
It's a parking lot. They apparently were contacted by the building department to say that the building department issued a certificate of occupancy in error. And considering how long it takes the building department to issue a C of O, it seems kind of odd. They wanted to speak to us about it. I don't know if this is one of the parking lots that we passed a resolution on years ago, because I think this one, it's partially in an R72, so we might have had to do a BSA something other, but they were supposed to be here tonight to further explain, what the issue is and what they're asking. And I've been in touch with them. Viola's been in touch with them. We asked, were they going to participate in person or by Zoom?
Right.
They're not here, so.
Well, maybe they'll come next month.
Okay, when I looked into Google, this appears to be an L-shaped site.
Well, yes, I sent everyone, a Google map of that. There's one parking lot, then I think it backs onto another parking lot. It's not the same ownership,
No,
but,
but this particular lot seemed to, have an opening on Amsterdam.
And on 165th.
And at 165th.
yes, yes,
Okay.
right.
When they come, that's when we can
Right.
discuss it.
So in terms of item number 5, launching the Washington Heights Inwood survey, we discussed last month getting, sort of the low tech, no tech version. So there is the PDF that was created, and I sent it to everyone. So we can get those out, or ask the office to have those sent to, libraries and such. I think it was Anthony who asked if the digital version's available. It is. I just wanted to forward the PDF so that, we had them and you can, print them. I tweaked it a bit because what they sent me was 3 pages, but the third page had like 2 or 3 lines on it. So I had to take the PDF and convert it to a Word document and then tighten up the format to get it on 2 pages. Because actually, if we're going to print it, if it's only 2 pages, you can do a single page 2-sided, as opposed to having to do 3 pages.
2 pages is better.
It didn't look to me as though it had are you opening it up?
I was trying to right now. I'm looking for it in the email.
It didn't look to me as though it had an official look to it. It didn't seem to have like the Historic Districts Council logo on it.
Well, it is.
So somebody who might just be passing by it might not realize that it had any real significance, or it looked like something that somebody maybe just on their own might have created.
Well, I mean, they could also read that it's coming from, the community board. It has our address. We can put it on community board letterhead. The digital version is obviously going to be, through an e-blast from us. if we put it on letterhead, I think it's gonna be 3 pages again. But so we can see what can be done, with that.
Do we have a new logo yet? We
No.
voted on that
No,
lately.
No,
yeah.
no.
Yeah, what did we vote to?
I don't know if we voted on any, but,
Well,
I
the
don't
point of
think
that is if we do have a logo,
Yeah.
instead of letterhead, perhaps.
yeah,
use
but I don't know if
But I
anyone in
don't
the community
think
would
it- I don't
recognize the
think
new
we
logo
have
as
it yet.
being us.
It
Well,
may
it
still be-
says Community Board 12.
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, if our letterhead would say City of New York Community Board 12, if the whole idea is it doesn't look official, then, if we did City of New York Community Board 12, it would be consistent with other documents that they've seen.
Right.
Well, apparently we're no longer gonna use the city seal.
At the moment, this is what we have.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what,
Yeah, I know, but apparently that's not what these consultants came up with.
right, but
I don't think that's been finalized.
my-
yet,
my-
'cause
my
among
point
other things,
is-
the bridge doesn't look like the George Washington.
well, yeah, we pointed that out. And also that
Yeah, but they don't
logo,
fix it.
yeah, that
until they
logo
do.
is this almost the same logo as the Chamber of Commerce. We pointed out that,
Oh, yes. Right.
why are we basically having a logo that's so close to
Right.
theirs?
Right.
Logo Biden.
Yeah. Is there any old business?
Yes,
What is that old business?
do we have any news from the BSA on the Cumming Street site?
I think the last thing that was reported is the environmental is not complete and they did not, they don't expect to do anything until, is it December?
Really?
Yes, I believe that was the last update. So,
Oh,
that's where we are.
oh, okay, I thought they were saying they were gonna be making a decision over the summer.
Yes, but that got updated.
Oh, okay.
That was the last
Okay.
update, that the environmental, is not complete. And I asked, when they expect to have it complete, and the response rate, but it keeps getting pushed out. So they're looking to complete that by the end of the year. I think I also asked if there was something in particular on the environmental that was, so I don't recall if I did that or not, but I did not get a response.
And I'm sorry. Could I just ask, you mentioned earlier that there was a link for a session about the city of Yes for
Yes,
economic opportunity?
both of them.
Yeah,
I did send them.
you did send it.
I did send them.
Okay, fine.
And the city of Yes for economic opportunity will be presented to us at the November meeting. And
Right.
our
Right.
colleagues from city planning who are still online said that if we go through that,
Right.
if there are particular questions, particular areas we want them to focus, we get those to them before the meeting, they can be prepared to, give more attention to those, areas or answer those questions. Old business?
I have a quick question. How tall of a building can you build on an R7A? This is that lot that he was just talking about.
R7A?
R7A, yeah. Would a commercial overlay of what, C2 4?
I'm good, but I don't have it memorized.
Oh, okay. No, I was just curious because.
But just to be, anything with a letter after it is contextual, which means there's an absolute height limit. So R7A, there's A, B, or whatever. But that means there's an absolute limit. If it's an R72, means it's height factor. That means there's no maximum. There's what's called the sky exposure plane. So you can go up for a certain amount at the property line. And once you hit whatever, in some cases it's 60 feet, 80 feet, you have to start setting back. And as long as you don't break that sky exposure plane, you can go as high as you want. And so the 1960s zoning, one of the things that was done, if you think of like the Seagram's office building or many of the buildings along 6th Avenue, would encourage you to have like a large plaza in front of you, and then you can go straight up. Because although it's going straight up, because you're so far back in the property, you're not breaking the sky exposure plane.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I was just gonna add, I mean, it's roughly 9 stories if you do inclusionary housing or you adding affordable housing, that's the maximum you can go, 4.60. 4 is the regular without any inclusionary housing, affordable housing. That's these R7A, yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's like at most a 9-story building.
I would think it would be more beneficial to make it, keep that little area kind of a commercial and like.
Which area are we talking
That
about?
was like that one lot that he spoke about, the one that Martin
On
suggested.
Nagel?
Well, I
Yeah, on
think
Nagel and Thayer.
Yeah, so but we're
148 Nagel.
right, but we're off topic
Right.
because we're old business. Is there any new business? Because this is what we're going to discuss at the next meeting.
Okay. It was just basically that. It was just like kind of like just
Yeah, but the
out of
point is-
curiosity.
That's how big you can build, but that doesn't say what it's going to be.
Cause I could see that area be more of like a commercial area instead of like putting a residential area building in there, and especially that the train's right there too. You know,
Is there any new business?
I just want to go back to the survey for 1 second. If we're not allowed, it's okay.
Which survey?
The Washington Heights and Inwood Landmarks Survey.
Uh-huh.
I just saw the hard copy and I put a note for myself, and I'm sorry I didn't say it earlier. My only suggestion is there's a beautiful sentence that says, we would love to know which sites in your neighborhood you'd like to see recognized as candidates for preservation. That should be the first sentence.
Should have said that last week.
Too late? Okay,
No,
that's
no.
cool.
Well,
If it's too late, I'll move on. The only.
we
thing is-
haven't released it yet, so it's not
Okay.
too late, but it's like,
Very
I don't want to drive him crazy.
Okay.
But I can suggest like moving that.
Just that one, only because it's, you're not.
Send me an email on that,
Done.
please, so I don't have to
Done.
remember.
Done.
we call a motion to adjourn, right?
Oh, yeah, new business.
I asked if there was new
Well,
business.
Anybody? No new business? No, no new business here.
Is there, it is 9:02. Is there a motion to adjourn?
we adjourn.
A second.
Those in favor? Buonanotte a tutti.
Go.
Night, guys. Good night.
Good night, all.